What does it bring to people to study Buddhism? What the Buddha taught was 3 types of higher education. His Eightfold Path, which is the 4th of his 4 Noble Truths, which is sort of his original framework of teaching, and everything later in his teaching, as expansive as it becomes, can be fit into that. But that Eightfold Path is a path of 3 education. It has 8 branches which fit into 3 higher educations. Now you read Buddhist translators constantly saying 3 higher trainings, but I consider that training is a better word for a soldier among humans, and maybe dogs and cats and horses and other animals who are trained to do this and that. Whereas shiksha it means education, learning something. Adhishiksha means intense education or higher education, you could say. So the 3 higher educations are educations in ethics, educations in mind, control and understanding of the mind and use of the mind, and education in wisdom, which means education in the nature of reality and the investigation of the nature of reality, critical examination and exploration of reality. And those 3 higher educations really correspond kind of to the ethics one is sort of politics, sociology, society, relates to that. The higher education in mind relates to psychology, but really it relates to something we don't have in the West so much, which is training you how to use your mind, where you change your psyche actually, rather than what is your mind. Because in a way that you have a mind is a given in Buddhist science. And finally, the most important of them, ultimately, to achieve liberation, freedom, lessening of suffering, lessening and freedom from suffering, is the education in wisdom, which means the exploration of reality, which is actually science. Then you are studying an ancient way of examining the nature of reality, a non-materialistic, dogma-dominated science about the nature of reality with the mind involved. It isn't a spiritualistic or non-rational thing or sort of blind faith beliefs like people think of religion. That's how people think of religion as. But it is a very critical, rational, logical, but also empirical, experiential, and perceptual training and education in how to perceive reality. And the learning about the use of the mind is in order to improve your scientific instrument with which you do investigate reality, which is your own mind. And your ethics really has to do with how you should behave to not be in a turbulent lifestyle of conflict with other people by being more other sensitive, which means ethical, other regarding, as I think they say, some ethicists say, about how you act with people so as not to provoke them, not to poke them, not to bother them. So you study Buddhism to improve your ability to use your mind to investigate reality, see how others did investigate reality and what they came up with in regard to theory, although luckily the Buddhist scientists, philosophers, yogis, great masters, like Buddha, did not have a dogmatic theory of the nature of reality because they decided that reality is beyond pinning down by theory. And theory is very helpful in how to orient yourself in order to try to experience and to investigate the nature of reality. But theory doesn't capture the nature of reality. The nature of reality is beyond theory, but it is not beyond experience. We do experience it, and then we tend to misinterpret our experiences, was Buddha's insight, which he called ignorance or misknowing. And so the idea is to correct that misknowing, to properly and correctly and fully know the nature of reality, which one Buddhist theory is that it's fully possible to do. So the best way of studying Buddhism is to study it not as a religion, but as a set of scientific theories, activities, texts, and traditions that you can employ for your own investigation. And just like when you learn biology, you don't consider yourself to be a member of the religion of biologism. So therefore, when you study that, you're using the services, the mental, physical, emotional, intellectual services that Buddhism offers human beings to become more aware of the nature of reality. And this brings me to my favorite slogan that I use nowadays after 50 years of teaching this, which is that what is Buddhism? Ultimately, Buddhism is realism. So Buddhism means that you want to know what reality is, and based on a certain faith coming from the experience of the Buddha himself, who said, wow, when you know reality, you're going to be free from that suffering, which comes from your misknowing your reality at the moment. So when you know it accurately and precisely, then you will be free of suffering. And that's a very encouraging and maybe, who knows, maybe overly optimistic prescription, you could say. But based on that, there's a tendency in the Buddhist science to want to know more always about the nature of reality. Never to think that ignorance is bliss, but only that realistic knowledge is bliss. That's sort of the general perspective and orientation with which one engages in the study of the Buddhist sciences.